seminary, thinking about what we learned in seminary, some of the courses. Of course, preaching was on the list of required courses. And yeah, one of the, you get lots of advice during seminary, and sometimes I think it would be more helpful to have a little experience in a church under someone and then go to seminary, so you have a little more idea about what it is you're learning or what you want to learn, and then come back to it. But one of the sort of tidbits of advice that I remember is that some would even say, when you enter into a church community, wait a year even before you suggest any change. Some would say, wait a while, get to know everybody, build those bridges and connections, and don't suggest anything too radical for a while. Just kind of see how things are going. So I thought about that as I was reading this scripture passage from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, when we hear Jesus' first sermon we get to hear when he is back in Nazareth. And at first it starts out okay. It says that they're amazed, And here is Joseph's son, so they knew him. And I'm sure they felt a kind of ownership almost of Jesus. Having known him as he was growing up, and now hearing of all these amazing things that he's doing, he comes back to them, and there's this line in there. When you think it back to the scripture passage, Jesus is demonstrating this ability he has to see into the hearts and the minds of the people there, and he knows what they're thinking, and he says he can imagine what they're thinking. Do here in your hometown what we have heard you did in Capernaum. So they're almost wanting to see this. Maybe they want to see what he can do and sort of display this. And what does he do that so upsets them? Does anyone remember what he says? What does he say?
Everybody's healed.
Right. Right. He reminds them of not one but two stories in which God seems to pass over those who need healing in Israel and goes outside of Israel. Now, at that time, in that culture, it was traditional that anyone living there would have had obligations to their family and their village first. So what Jesus is doing is really upsetting their sense of community. And it's almost like he's challenging them. There are lots of ways we can look at this passage, and I'm sure many things we can get out of it. One thing that strikes me is it feels like he's really challenging what their view of community is. God's view of community or understanding of community is much bigger than theirs. And this is extremely upsetting to them. Now, it's interesting because they have heard these stories before. Isn't that interesting that Jesus is handed a scroll of Isaiah? So they have scripture, and they have heard they must have heard those other stories before. Now, does anyone remember those stories? And they come from, the ones he mentions come from 1 Kings and 2 Kings. So the first story is about Elijah. He's on the run, and it's the beginning of a drought, and God is protecting him. And where he's staying, God has kind of had him in a ravine, and the brook dries up. So God sends him to this widow, not an Israelite, to have some food and drink. And he comes to this widow, and he sees her, she's picking up sticks. And he says, and she's got a son, and he says to her, can you get me a drink of water? And as she's going to go fetch it, he says, could I get a little something to eat too? A piece of bread or whatever. And she says to him, she says, well, now, I was just going to go in and make a little cake of bread, but this is my last. I'm collecting these sticks to make a fire so I can make this up, and then this is our last meal. This is all I have, and then we're going to die. So she was preparing for this last meal. This is it. This is all they had. This is what they were going to have, and then they were just going to starve, and this was it. And he says to her, Elijah, he says, make me a piece of bread first with a little oil and a little flour, and then make some for you and your son, and you will find with God's gift that it will not run out. You will have a little oil and a little flour for as long as this drought lasts. And this is what happens. Now the other thing that happens when Elijah is there is that her son nearly dies. He gets sicker and sicker and he stops breathing, and she comes to Elijah and she says, did you bring this on me? And so he goes to the boy, and then he's praying to God, please help this boy. And the boy he's brought back to life. This is what happens in that first story. Now the second story Jesus mentioned comes from 2 Kings, and it's chapter 5, and it's the story of a soldier named Naaman. And he's a commander, in fact. He's very highly thought of. But the one problem is he has leprosy. And at some point, the armies there, it says that he was a Syrian commander, I believe, said the armies took captive a young girl from Israel, and she's serving Naaman's wife. Naaman is the name of the soldier. And she's serving his wife, and the girl from Israel says, if only you would go see this prophet. He could help you. So this is Elisha, the prophet. And so Naaman ends up seeking out the prophet. Now when he finally finds him, Elisha doesn't even come out of his house. He just sends his servant out with a message, and he says, if you wash 7 times in the Jordan, you'll be cleansed. And of course, at first, Naaman's upset at this, because he thinks he should either have instructions that seem more magical, or either, Elisha should at least come out and greet him, or something, or the rivers in his own place should be good enough. But finally, his own servants, Naaman's servants, say, just try this. And he goes and he washes 7 times in the Jordan, and he's cleansed. So these are these 2 stories that Jesus tells, and they are so upsetting. They are so upsetting to the people of Nazareth at this time. So I'm just wondering, why is it that they would have known these stories and been at least fine with them in some form or another? But when Jesus comes and says in that moment, this is being fulfilled, now, when he quotes Isaiah, he reads from it, and then he shares that, it's enough to make them so angry, they're ready to kill him. Well, I'm going to tell you a silly example of an upsetting sense of community at my house this last couple of weeks. I shared this with Grandpa earlier, but I have a wonderful bird feeder, in my backyard. And I've just been enjoying it because I can sit in the kitchen and I can see it out the window, and we've got goldfinches and house finches, and there's this big woodpecker that comes that has red on his head, and then I have the little chickadee, and every once in a while there's blue jay, there's some bluebirds, there's cardinals. I've been so enjoying my bird feeder. Now we've been there, the house, for 3 years now. I look out the other day, and what do I see? A squirrel wrapped around my feeder. And I was so upset in an insane kind of way. Like, it really bothered me. And I've never seen a squirrel up there before. And of course, I can't afford to feed the squirrels. He empties it. He empties it within probably 2 hours. He's back and forth up there stuffing his cheeks or whatever. And it made me so mad, and I would open the door and slam the back door to scare him, and he'd run off, and I was just, I was so, like, I couldn't move my mind off of this, I know this seems really silly probably, but it really got to me. So I was thinking about this though, like, I'm creating these boundaries. The squirrels stay over here, and I really like them. They're cute. They can be over here. But the minute they get into my feeder, and I almost thought, I could just see it a little bit. These birds are the Israelites. They belong here with the food, And here comes this squirrel getting into the food, and I did not want him to have it. And it made me angry. And I realized, because I couldn't get anything else done that day. I mean, I was, you have this solid, like this nice, peaceful, serene moment, and you can look at birds, and I'm at the kitchen table, and I can get some work done. And I just can't do anything else. My mind is like, is he back up there? Is he still there? How is he getting up there? And I couldn't concentrate. And it's like all the useful, good thoughts I could have had just dispersed. They just left. And I just thought, when Jesus is pictured just walking away, I mean, this is an angry mob. How does he do it? How does he just walk away? And maybe we can't explain that, how that happened exactly. But there is a sense that speaks to a very true picture of what happens in our mind when we get so stuck on something, or so angry about something in not a good way, not like a self-righteous kind of way, We get so stuck on something that I do think all of that love, all of that light, it just doesn't have a place to be. And it just leaves. I read something by someone who was in conflict mediation, and he had a comment. He said, my years in conflict mediation have given me a clue. Some mobs, some crowds, some passionate, vindictive assemblies can get so enraged, so angry, so violent, so hypnotized by their own fulminations that truth, light, and universal love are able to depart from amongst them so swiftly that they don't even notice. I thought that was such a good way of thinking about that event and how he walked right away. But there is that question, how often do we create boundaries, or we separate ourselves from others, or how often do we think of ourselves as better than others, or more deserving in some way? It's very easy to celebrate ideas of diversity and acceptance and understanding and freedom from a distance. Sometimes maybe we don't always celebrate that in those concrete situations. Did anybody, Connie Helm sent out a forward this week. Did anybody get her forward? It said, "This is a real sermon." Did anybody read that? Well, I thought I'd just...
About the guy that...
Yes. So I'm going to read this story. His name is Tim. He has wild hair, wears a t-shirt with holes in it, jeans and no shoes. This was literally his wardrobe for his entire 4 years of college. He is brilliant, kind of profound and very bright. He became a Christian while attending college. Across the street from the campus is a well-dressed, very conservative church. They want to develop a ministry to the students, but they're not sure how to go about it. One day, Tim decides to go there. He walks in with no shoes, jeans, his t-shirt, and wild hair. The service has already started. And so Tim starts down the aisle looking for a seat. The church is completely packed, and he can't find a seat. By now, people are looking uncomfortable, but no one says anything. Tim gets closer and closer and closer to the pulpit, and when he realizes there are no seats, he just squats right down on the carpet. By now, the people are really uptight, and the tension in the air is thick. About this time, the minister realizes that from way at the back of the church, a deacon is slowly making his way toward Tim. Now, the deacon is in his 80s, has silver gray hair and a three-piece suit. A godly man, very elegant, very dignified, very courtly. He walks with a cane, and as he starts walking toward this boy, everyone is saying to themselves that you can't blame him for what he's going to do. How can you expect a man of his age and of his background to understand some college kid on the floor? It takes a long time for the man to reach the boy. The church is utterly silent except for the clicking of the man's cane. All eyes are focused on him. You can't even hear anyone breathing. The minister can't even preach his sermon until the deacon does what he has to do. And now they see this elderly man drop his cane on the floor. With great difficulty, he lowers himself and sits down next to Tim and worships with him so he won't be alone. Everyone chokes up with emotion. And the minister gains control. He says, "What I'm about to preach you'll never remember. What you have just seen you will never forget. Be careful how you live. You may be the only Bible some people ever read." That last line, be careful how you live. You may be the only Bible some people will ever read. It's pretty powerful.
There's a lot.
Yes. How do our Bibles look? It's beautiful.
Powerful.
So what do our actions say? And what kind of an effort do we really give to connect with others? And especially those we don't know. I think that's one thing about the story is this man, there's so much of it that's powerful. This man didn't know him at all, and yet he came so that this other boy would feel more comfortable. We live in a world that, as was said around the Sunday school table, we really have sort of two different opposing forces in our world that we can connect with. One way of being is that we believe in all the boundaries and the differences, and we create these, these boundaries in a way. Think politics sometimes, how that makes people feel. Any kind of example could work. Or there's also a force in life in which we are asked to, I think, remember that we are what the common denominator, we are all God's children. And it's important to try and share that love and that light with all that we meet. And try to connect with people on that level. And I was thinking about that, I felt like there was a bit of a strand running through the last few services we've had. You think about the Gun Violence Prevention Sunday. We mentioned a little bit about how sometimes it occurs out of a kind of isolation. People are feeling alone or isolated. They're not connecting. We think about why come to church. We thought about just for a moment about the fact that so many people gather less together, come less together. We're more isolated as individuals. How do we really connect and honor the fact that we are all God created? Some might ask, as a church, are we only serving our own? Or do we try and serve outside, if you will? How do we do that? And it's amazing because I would say even those we love and who are closest to us, there is a truth that we will never be able to transcend those boundaries of another person. I look at Elin. Sometimes I'm in the kitchen. I'm doing something. I notice she's not been with me for a while, so of course I have to go check. And she's in her room and she'll just be playing with some little cars or little dolls, lining things up, whatever she's doing. And I just realized she's in her own little world. And she's already got these thoughts and these feelings, and this is her life. This is the only life she'll ever know. Right now is developing. And you have your life and all of your memories. And Jean has her life and all of her memories and thoughts and feelings. And there's a way in which this is all we can know. But if we try to stretch ourselves, how good that can be in our world that needs it. I had all these other notes, but I think I'm going to end it there and just pray that we can keep this story with us and not let that God God's presence depart from us, that we stay open to that in our life.